How much does it really cost to live in a van? We'll talk about this question and more coming up. Welcome to the Robert Witham Show, a weekly podcast where we discuss travel, nomadic lifestyle, simple living, and minimalism. I'm your host, Robert Witham. Thank you for joining us in this episode. So welcome to episode 7 of the podcast. You've probably heard by now that the nomadic lifestyle is cheaper than living traditionally in sticks and bricks. Is it true or is it just hype? Well, we'll explore this question in just a moment, but first it's time for Nomad News. I do not have an exciting personal type story for this week, but it is an important piece of news that's been circulating this past week, and that is that this is the last year to obtain Real ID for air travel and access to federal facilities. Well, many of you probably already have taken care of this, but just in case, I'm going to throw it out there because it is of particular concern to nomads who travel a lot and any other traveler. So there's a link in the show notes if you want to check out more details about this from the Department of Homeland Security, but it's now down to the last year for Americans to obtain a Real ID in order to access airports and federal government facilities. The Real ID Act was passed by Congress in 2005 based on recommendations from the 9/11 Commission following, of course, 9/11 terrorist attacks here in the U.S. The Real ID Act sets minimum standards for state-issued IDs, including driver's licenses, which is what most of us are using for state-issued IDs as nomads. As of October 1st, 2020, that's a little less than a year now, federal agencies are prohibited from accepting IDs that are not Real ID compliant under the Real ID Act, which means as of October 1st, 2020, you'll need a Real ID compliant identification card or passport to access airports, federal facilities, or nuclear power plants. But if you're accessing nuclear power plants, you probably already know about this. A quick check, if you want to know if your ID is Real ID compliant or not, is to look on the upper portion of the card. There should be a star. There's a few different designs that different states use. In Wyoming, it's just a plain gold star, but you just want to make sure that that is on there so that you know you'll be able to access airports or other federal facilities. Enhanced driver's licenses are offered by several states currently, and those IDs will be accepted in lieu of a Real ID because they meet the same requirements. They just don't have the star on them. So if it's an enhanced driver's license, you're all set, or if it's already a Real ID and you have the star on it, you're also all set. According to the Department of Homeland Security, all U.S. states and territories are now considered to be fully compliant. That doesn't mean that there are not a lot of non-compliant IDs still floating around because several states at least have only recently gained compliance. So it just depends on what state you're in or where your ID is from, how recently they got updated, and if they were doing Real IDs, and if you had the appropriate documentation when you had your last ID renewed or issued. So if you have an older ID that is not Real ID compliant, doesn't have a star on it, you will need to upgrade to a Real ID compliant document prior to October 1st, 2020 to access airports or federal facilities, or have a passport or other acceptable identification with you. The Real ID Act sets minimum federal requirements for documentation. You're probably familiar with these requirements already if you've obtained a driver's license recently, because this is the stuff you have to have, but these are the minimum requirements per the federal legislation, and states may impose additional restrictions on top of these. So you have to have documentation that proves your full legal name, date of birth, social security number, 2 proofs of address of principal residence. This is the big one for a lot of nomads, and lawful status. Now, the address thing is where it gets challenging for nomads. So for a lot of us, we don't have a lease from an apartment or a house. We don't have a mortgage or property deeds, that kind of thing. And so it can become difficult to prove that you live where you say you live. And of course, to get a driver's license or many other official documents these days, you need to have both a residential street address and a mailing address. Your mailing address can be the same as your street address, but you cannot use a mail forward or a P.O. box as your street address. So this is going to be a challenge for Nomads, and one of the reasons I want to throw it out here a year ahead of time, just to remind everybody this is coming. Those who do not have the required documentation for IDs will be eligible only for IDs specifically marked as not being acceptable for real ID purposes. And that was way too many uses of ID in one sentence. And if you have an ID that's marked as not acceptable for real ID purposes, you will not be able to access airports or federal facilities unless you have a passport or other form of accepted ID. And I look at the show notes, I'll have a link to Homeland Security's website with the details about what else they'll take. It's a pretty weird list. So for the most part, for most people, there's going to be a driver's license or a passport. Now, it seems like, to be honest, this is going to create some real challenges for people who did not have the appropriate documentation. Maybe they don't have a birth certificate, maybe they don't have address verification, whatever, but all of a sudden, I think there's going to be some people, a lot of people probably, next year who suddenly cannot access airports or federal facilities. And I think the federal facilities might be the biggest deal there. So I'm sure some people will have to make unexpected air trips, and that can be a problem for them. Sometimes something comes up and you just have to travel a long distance quickly when you weren't planning on it. But for accessing federal facilities, you're on the Nomad, you're on the road, you need to access a Social Security office or something, you won't be able to if you don't have a real ID card or a passport. So that's going to be a real challenge. And this is difficult for people who don't have address verification. It's difficult. People don't have birth certificates. I was just talking with a few friends this week, and they were saying how it's taken months for them to get new birth certificates. So depending on where you were born, where you happen to have to deal with for vital records, last time I had to get a birth certificate, it only took they had a 3-day turnaround. So I had it back within about a week or a week and a half from the time I mailed it out. But including mailing time and everything. But some people are running into a big problem getting birth certificates, and if you've lost yours or it's been destroyed or whatever, and suddenly it takes months and months to get this. So this is a process you'll probably want to start now, so you do have time to get all this done in case if you do need to access a federal facility or an airport starting October 1st next year. All right, so that's the buzz on the real IDs that are being enforced as of next year. And I wanted to give a quick mention here, too. I put out a video a couple of days ago announcing the launch of a new online course that I've created. It's titled Nomad Lifestyle 101. And again, I'll have links to that in the video description on YouTube, as well as on the show notes that go on my website that go with this episode. But if you're interested in that, you can check that out. This course is the result of a number of requests I've had from viewers over the past year or two to create a one-stop comprehensive resource for people who are new or aspiring to be nomads and want to have a good grounding and be able to give a good foundation for success. And so I've tried to create that. Right now there are more than 20 videos in the course, as well as all 4 of my books. My 4 most recent books that are of interest to nomads are included in that as PDF downloads, as well as some other PDFs that I'm still in the process of adding. So right now it's available with some introductory promotional extra bonuses that will not always be available. But if you want to check that out, there'll be links in the video description on YouTube and in the show notes on my website. So moving on to the topic for this episode, how much does it cost to live in a van? This is a question I'm asked a lot, and for good reason. I mean, this is a particularly important question for anyone who's on a tight budget. And the last thing you want, right, is to give up your apartment or your house, whatever you got, sell a bunch of your stuff, move into a van or an RV or an SUV car, whatever you're doing, but move into a vehicle and then figure out that you don't have enough money to make ends meet. So this is particularly important for people who are on tight budgets and have to be sure they're going to have enough money to live on as a nomad. In fact, I think this question is so important that I actually included an entire video about it in my Nomad Lifestyle 101 course, because it is a frequent question and it is important. So in this podcast, I'm going to provide a basic overview of this topic, but I will be releasing an updated video in a few months with examples from my own spending. I usually track my spending each month. I know exactly what I spend, but I was lazy about it for a few months this summer. I didn't do it. So I've started doing it again. I think in September, so I'm in my 2nd month of it now. And so as soon as I have a few months of solid data, I'll be releasing another video with some specific examples from my own experiences. And I want a few months of data because things can bounce around. So, for example, in September, I spent a fair bit on gas because I migrated from northeast Wyoming to southern Nevada. But in October and November, I want to spend a lot less gas. So I want to see that balance out. And then, like auto maintenance, right, or repairs in a van, I was like $20-something in September. I put a fuel pressure regulator in while I was in Wyoming, and the part was cheap, and I did it myself. But this month, I'm having some brake work and exhaust work and a few other things done on the van while I'm down here in Nevada. Nothing critical, but they're things that I want to get done preventatively because I have a leaky gasket on the exhaust where it connects to the header. I want to get that fixed before it fails all the way, and I have the brakes are just about worn out in the front. They're starting to squeal a little, and my mechanic pulled the wheels off yesterday and checked, and they're just hitting the wear indicators are just hitting the rotors, so no damage to the rotors yet, so it's going to be a relatively cheap brake job. Just have to replace the pads, but everything else is good. But I want to get that done before it is a bigger problem. So, but that'll skew my maintenance costs. My gas costs will be lower for October. My maintenance costs will be higher. So I wanted to have a few months to balance that out, and I will be doing an updated video about that. But for now, I just want to kind of talk about it in somewhat general terms and give you an idea of my opinion on it. And again, like I said, I go a lot deeper into this in the course, in the videos in the course as well. But so, how much does it cost to live in a van as a nomad, and is it really cheaper? Well, the short answer is it depends. And I know that's not the definitive answer you were hoping for right now. But it's true, it depends. It varies. So van life or RV life can cost literally as much as you want it to cost each month, or it can cost relatively little if you are frugal. There's a number of variables that really impact the monthly cost for living in a van, RV, or any other vehicle on the road, and some of these include things like debt, fuel, maintenance, food, campsites, your style of vehicle, and so on. So if you have a monthly payment on your vehicle, your fixed monthly expenses are going to be higher than someone who does not have a payment on their vehicle. That being said, ideally, hopefully, if you're making payments on a vehicle, it's because it's newer and in good condition. You might have lower maintenance costs than on an older vehicle, but that doesn't always hold true. How much you have to spend on maintenance, the more reliable and better maintained the vehicle is, the less you'll spend each month on maintenance. Food, if you're eating out all the time, doing a lot of meals at restaurants, that's going to cost a lot more than if you're cooking frugally in your rig or you're camped. So campsites, are you boondocking most or all of the time, or are you staying in RV parks a lot? 'Cause that makes a big difference in monthly budget. And finally, just your style of vehicle. If you have a reliable, well-maintained, good quality van or minivan, that's almost always going to be cheaper to operate and maintain than an RV of any size. But especially the really big RVs, then you're getting into the real, single-digit fuel efficiency for sure. So that's going to affect your cost of living. All of which would say that if you're thinking about getting your vehicle to be a nomad still, it's definitely worth thinking about the costs associated with different vehicles. Because if you're on a tight budget at all, you can get more comfort out of an RV, but if you have to actually drive and move the thing, it's going to be almost always cheaper to have a van or minivan or something like that. All right, so what about some numbers? I know that's really what you're probably hoping to hear. Here's some numbers. Let me say, I know a lot of people who are on very tight budgets as nomads, oftentimes $800 to $1,000 a month. Now, that's not a ton of money, That's less than minimum wage if you're working. So it is possible to live very frugally as a nomad. This is, however, a very tight budget. I want to acknowledge that, and I see sometimes what I think is a little bit irresponsible promotion where you'll see online, whether a website or YouTube especially, where somebody will be promoting that you can live on just a few $100s a month or some very low number, and you can live on $800 to $1,000 a month as a nomad, for example, but that is a very tight budget. It's very much going to limit some things you can do. You're going to definitely be not having payments on a vehicle. I think you're going to be having to be very careful with food. You're going to have to be budgeting very carefully for gas, so you don't run out of gas before the month's over. Then you have to move and you can't because you don't have any fuel. That sort of thing. And it's just, you're not going to have a lot of money for extras. So it is a tight budget. You still also need to be able to save money each month for unplanned expenses, because stuff happens, right? I mean, we all know that things happen, and you just have to be prepared to deal with it as best as possible when it does. So 800 to 1,000, I think, is kind of a minimum. I've heard of a few people trying to do this less than that, but boy, that's 800 to 1,000 is a tight budget. Trying to do it on even less is really going to be tight, but it may be possible. I'm not going to come out and recommend that to anybody. You'll have to make your own decision on that if that's your situation. But because like I said, you do have to be able to save some for the unplanned things that come up too, and that means you're actually not going to be able to spend, $600, $700 a month. You're going to actually have to spend less than that so you can save some each month. My opinion, for a nomad who is living frugally in a van or something and doesn't have debt, I'm going to say 1,500 to 2,000 is my recommendation for a good budget number. So if you live in frugally, that gives you plenty to cover your monthly expenses, but it also provides some margin for those occasional extras and for savings for unplanned expenses. So extras, you're hanging out in Quartzsite with a bunch of your friends and everybody decides to go to Silly Al's for pizza. It's nice to be able to do that once in a while, and having a little bit of margin to do those kind of things is nice, or to take that extra side trip, or to stop at that national monument or national park you hadn't planned on, and but if you have no margin, then that $20 or $30 may just be something you can't do. So, and if you can't, you can't. But if you're able to have a little extra, I think it's nice to be able to do some of those things while you're traveling about. And then unplanned expenses, I mentioned this a few times, things come up. The vehicle breaks down and you weren't planning on it, because we're never planning on it, right? And it needs a $500 or $1,000 repair. That always stinks if you got the money in the bank to pay for it. If you don't have the money, then it's like a legitimate crisis, because now you're stranded somewhere. That's your transportation and your house, and you're stranded wherever you broke down. And if you're on the road, you got to try and get off the road and try and find a place you can park, and hopefully don't get towed while you're trying to get it fixed. All this, so it's a huge problem. So if you got a little savings and you have some money saved for those unplanned expenses like breakdowns, you can take care of it. And there's other unplanned expenses. Your phone conks out on you or something, or you lose it and you got to replace that, or there's just a ton of unplanned things that can come up, an illness or an interruption in your income for one reason or another. And having that a little margin for those unplanned things is hugely beneficial. So again, you can live on less than that, but I recommend aiming for 1,500 to 2,000 a month while you're on the road, and just because it gives you some margin. You can live frugally on less than that, and you got some breathing room. So if you're looking for jobs on the road, I recommend aiming for that kind of income. And if you're on retirement income or whatever, just Social Security, and it's less than that, I just kind of recommend, if you can, trying to be creative and find ways to make a little extra money, whether that's a little bit extra each month to supplement, or whether you do one or two short seasonal gigs per year to make some extra money to put in the bank. It just will give you a lot more financial security to have a little bit of margin there with your money. So you really can live quite inexpensively in a van if you avoid debt and are frugal. And so again, by avoiding debt and being frugal, I mean you're not drowning in credit card debt. You're not making payments on a vehicle. You're camping for free in different places, whether that's stealth camping or boondocking on public land, whatever. You're finding ways to camp for free, so you're not paying rent. You're buying food and cooking it in your rig or at your campsite versus restaurants and stuff. So if you keep your costs down in these big variable areas where we all have control over, you really can live quite cheaply as a nomad. So again, the realistic minimum, I think, is probably 800 to 1,000 a month. I know some people who live on less than that, but boy, even 800 to 1,000 is pretty frugal when you start figuring out your costs for auto insurance and gas and food and whatever else you need each month, your phone bill maybe, and then trying to figure how to save some money for the unexpected stuff of life that comes up. But so that's like kind of, I think it's kind of a realistic minimum. I can't imagine wanting to go below that personally, and I will tell you, I have lived on that, so it is possible. I know it's possible to do, but it's tight. But I recommend, if at all possible, to aim for a little bit more, like $1,500 to $2,000 a month. Worst case scenario, if you got the extra income, is you've got your savings account's growing, right? I mean, there's not really much of a downside there if you can find a way to make that little bit extra. So listener questions. I only had one question last week that comes from it's me, Kay, in SD. I know where SD is, but I'm not going to say in case Kay doesn't want to disclose that publicly. So Kay writes, "Thank you, Robert. I enjoy your detailed explanation of things. I also appreciate hearing about the reality of extreme weather and keeping one step ahead of the unexpected. I recently bought a box of extreme boat survival food on Amazon. It is packaged very tiny and tastes good also." I did a video with Bob Wells. I don't remember when it aired. I think we recorded it a year and a half ago now. Anyways, and Bob had been sent a bunch of samples of some dehydrated survival type foods, and so I went through and tested them for him, did the cooking, and got to eat them, and then we did a video about my experiences using it. So I've done that, and as I said then, and I think it's still true, you don't have to do that when you're traveling, but if you're concerned about it at all, the survival food things, you get a package, a box of that, or a bucket, whatever style, it comes in, and you got a few meals or a few weeks worth of meals, whatever the case may be, depending on what you choose to store. But the stuff is shelf stable for years and years, so you can kind of put it away, buried in some part of your RV or van. It's hard to get to. It's okay, but at least you have that peace of mind, I guess, that if you're out camping somewhere in the middle of nowhere, like I often do, and the van breaks down, or you get a surprise storm or bad weather and you can't get out for a while and you're running low on food, at least you don't have to worry about running out of food, because you've got these dehydrated survival foods packages that you can make different meals out of. And they vary quite a bit in terms of the type of food and everything, so you'll just have to, I don't have any specific recommendations for you. Got a lot of experience with that, so I can't really recommend something in particular, but you search on Amazon or something, look for good reviews, and it's not a bad thing to have a little bit of food stashed away, and make sure you have extra water, because a lot of them, most of them, as far as I'm aware, require water to cook. You need water to survive. You can go for a few weeks without food without any tremendous difficulty. Most people, unless you have medical things that would interfere with that, you might be weak and not feeling very good, but you can go a few weeks without food if you need to. Water, we're only going to get a few days without at most, and we're going to be in bad shape by that point. And so with these survival foods, you're also usually going to need water to cook them as well. So I do recommend that even if you're going this route, you always make sure you have more water than you think you're going to need when you go in somewhere to camp. Mr. K also writes about podcasts. Could they take less data than YouTube in case someone has a minimal phone plan or is thinking of downsizing a plan? Here's a great point. These podcasts are actually available in two formats. There's the video one that goes on YouTube, and then there's an audio one, which is the same content. It's just that it's only audio, and that goes out through iTunes, or I guess Apple Podcasts now, and through Google Podcasts and some other places. You can get it there. You also can watch it on my website, robertwitham.com. Each new episode is posted there, along with an embedded video and an embedded audio player for just the audio podcast. So you do have those options. If you're concerned about data and you don't mind just listening to things, the audio file will be much smaller than the video file. The other option, though, if you're watching on YouTube, or if you prefer to watch it on YouTube, if you go into the settings, there's a little gear icon thing. Go into the settings, YouTube automatically chooses the video quality based on your network connection, but you can manually downsize that, and you can select a lower one all the way down to like 144, and that's going to give you really pixelated, not very good looking video, but the audio should still be fine, and it uses a fraction of the data as HD. Otherwise, there's a couple of other settings you can go to, and like 240 or 360 or something like that, and any of the lower settings will save data. Just the lower the setting you use, the lower the quality setting, the less data you're going to use. So that's a great way to save data. If you're just someone that doesn't have a good connection and it's buffering a lot, you can bump down to a lower video quality setting. And then also, you know, if you're limited on data and you're worried about running out of data or getting hit with overage charges or anything, you can dial that down. And that's true on any videos you watch on YouTube, including this podcast. So that's a great way to save data or to use less data if you're have a bad connection. So thanks for joining me in this podcast, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the thumbs up or the like button if you're watching it on YouTube. And if whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening in a podcast on your mobile device or whatever, or on your iPod, please consider subscribing to the podcast there so you can be notified when new ones are published. I try and publish every Monday. So far, I've been able to hit that. And if you enjoyed this and you think it might be beneficial to any of your family or friends or anything like that, please consider sharing it on social media. Those shares really help as well. So, you know, in conclusion, thanks for joining me. Remember to update your ID this year if necessary so that you don't run into any trouble starting in October next year. And as we mentioned, yes, it is possible to live quite inexpensively in a van if you're frugal. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I'll see you in the next one.